December 24th, 1944. Stalag VII-A, Moosburg, Bavaria. Behind barbed wire, 76,000 men from 33 nations waited for a war to end. Tonight, on Christmas Eve, the line between prisoner and guard would blur. Not because the war stopped, but because for a few hours, something deeper than war remembered itself. Stalag VII-A sat in the Bavarian countryside like a scar on frozen earth. Row after row of wooden barracks stretched across 75 acres, surrounded by double fences of barbed wire, guard towers every 100 meters, and searchlights, American, British, French, Soviet, Polish, Yugoslav, Italian. Men from across Europe crowded into barracks designed for half their number. They slept on wooden bunks stacked 3 high, wrapped in thin blankets that barely held off the December cold. The Americans had arrived in waves throughout 1944, shot down over Germany, captured during the Battle of the Bulge, survivors of failed bombing missions. They were pilots, gunners, infantry, engineers. Men who'd been fighting just days or weeks ago, now reduced to standing in line for watery soup and wondering if they'd live to see home. Staff Sergeant Robert Miller, 101st Airborne, sat in Barracks 14, writing a letter he couldn't send. The Red Cross allowed 1 postcard per month, already used. But writing helped. It made his wife feel less like a memory. "You writing to Santa?" asked Private Tommy Kowalski from the bunk above. "Funny. What else is there to do? Count the days?" Kowalski rolled over, springs creaking. "It's Christmas Eve, and we're eating rutabaga soup. Merry Christmas." Around them, 200 men tried to pretend tonight wasn't different from any other night. But the silence had a weight to it. Christmas made them think of snow falling on Main Street, families gathered around dinner tables, children opening presents they'd never see. Lieutenant James Parker, senior American officer in the barracks, stood at the door watching the guard towers. They're bringing something in. Men crowded to the windows. A truck rolled through the main gate, stopping at the German administrative building. Soldiers unloaded crates, not weapons or supplies, but something else. "What is it?" someone asked. "Looks like trees." Pine trees, small ones, maybe 4 feet tall. The Germans were unloading Christmas trees. Obergefreiter Klaus Becker stood in the guard tower watching the truck unload. He was 43 years old, too old for frontline service, relegated to guard duty at a POW camp, while younger men fought and died in France and Russia. He'd been a schoolteacher before the war, teaching history. Now he stood with a rifle, watching men who should have been his enemies, but mostly just looked cold and tired. Below, Hauptmann Friedrich Weber supervised the tree distribution. Weber ran Stalag VII-A with strict adherence to the Geneva Convention, not out of kindness, but because he believed order and rules were what separated civilization from chaos. "The regulations require humane treatment of prisoners. I interpret that broadly tonight," Weber said. "You have family, Becker? Wife and 2 daughters, in Munich. Then you understand, these men have families too. 1 night. That's all we're giving them. 1 night to remember they're human." Becker heard something else in Weber's voice. Exhaustion, maybe even doubt. The war was going badly. Everyone knew it, even if saying so was treason. The Allies were pushing from the west, the Soviets from the east. Germany was being squeezed like a vice. For men like Weber and Becker, this camp was becoming a strange limbo, guarding prisoners who might soon be guarding them. The Germans distributed the trees after evening roll call, 1 per barracks. No decorations, no lights, just bare pine trees carried through the snow by prisoners who didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In Barracks 14, Lieutenant Parker accepted the tree from a young German corporal who couldn't have been older than 19. The kid's hands shook as he passed it over, avoiding eye contact. "Danke," Parker said quietly. The corporal looked up, startled. "You speak German?" "A little. My grandmother was from Berlin." For a moment, something passed between them. Recognition, the absurdity of the situation. Then the corporal nodded stiffly and left. The men gathered around the tree, propped in a corner of the barracks. It smelled like pine and home and everything they'd lost. "Well," Kowalski said, "it's a tree. Now what?" "We make it Christmas," Miller said. They had almost nothing, but soldiers are resourceful. Someone produced a knife and whittled bark into rough ornaments. Another man tore strips from a spare undershirt and braided them into garland. A British officer in the next barracks donated a small mirror, broken into pieces that caught candlelight like stars. A French prisoner, who had been an artist before the war, sketched angels on scraps of paper, which they hung from branches with thread pulled from their uniforms. It took 2 hours. When they finished, the tree looked ridiculous and beautiful, a monument to stubborn hope built from nothing. "My daughter would love this," Miller whispered. Parker put a hand on his shoulder. "You'll tell her about it when you get home." As darkness settled, something unexpected began in the German section of the camp. Singing. The guards, young conscripts and old reservists, had gathered outside their quarters with their own small tree, and they were singing Silent Night. The melody drifted across the frozen compound, carried on cold air that turned breath to mist. The words were in German, strange and foreign, yet somehow familiar. In Barracks 14, the Americans fell silent, listening. "I know this song," Kowalski said quietly. "My grandmother used to sing it, in German. The melody was the same, but the words were different. Enemy words. Words from the other side of the wire." Then Parker started singing in English. One by one, the Americans joined, then the British in the next barracks, then the French, each in their own language, but the same melody, the same prayer for peace. The singing spread through the camp like fire. 76,000 men in 33 languages, all singing the same song. In the guard tower, Becker set down his rifle and sang along, tears freezing on his cheeks. After the singing ended, silence settled over the camp, but it was a different kind of silence, softer, more human. Hauptmann Weber walked to Barracks 14 and knocked on the door. An absurd courtesy, knocking before entering a building he controlled. Lieutenant Parker opened it. "Herr Leutnant," Weber said formally, "may I speak with you?" Parker stepped outside, wary. Guard-prisoner conversations were strictly regulated. This broke protocol. Weber pulled out a pack of cigarettes, real tobacco, not the sawdust mixture prisoners received. He offered one to Parker, who took it. They smoked in silence for a moment. "I have a son," Weber said finally. "Wehrmacht. Last I heard he was in Belgium, fighting in the Ardennes." Parker stiffened. The Battle of the Bulge. His division had been there before capture. "I have a daughter," Parker replied. 7 years old. She still believes in Santa Claus." Another silence. "This war," Weber said slowly, "is not what I thought war was. When I was young, war had rules. Soldiers fought soldiers. Civilians were spared. There was honor." He laughed bitterly. "Now there are no rules. Just destruction. Then why keep fighting? Because stopping is surrender, and surrender is death. But tonight I'm not a soldier. Tonight I'm just a man who misses his family. Like you. Parker didn't know what to say. My men, Parker said carefully. They need food. Real food, not watery soup. Some of them have frostbite, dysentery. They need medicine. I know. I requisition supplies. What arrives is, Weber gestured helplessly, Germany is starving. The camps receive what's left. So we starve together? Perhaps. But not tonight. Tonight, I've arranged something. An hour later, German guards brought crates to each barracks. Inside, real bread, cheese, sausages, a few bottles of schnapps. Not much, but more than they'd seen in months. Where did this come from? Miller asked suspiciously. Does it matter? Kowalski grabbed a piece of bread, bit into it, closed his eyes. Oh my God, real bread. The guards who delivered the food didn't just drop it and leave. They lingered. Some accepted offers to come inside, just for a moment, just to warm up. In Barracks 14, the young corporal who delivered the tree sat awkwardly on a bunk, holding a cup of ersatz coffee. His name was Hans. He was from Dresden. Do you have family? Miller asked. Had. My mother and sister. The bombing last February. He trailed off. The Americans knew about the Dresden firebombing. New Allied bombers had created a firestorm that killed tens of thousands. They didn't talk about it. I'm sorry, Miller said, and meant it. Hans looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. Your bombers killed them. You personally, maybe. Maybe. I was a B-17 gunner. Shot down over Munich in September. The tension in the barracks was electric. I should hate you, Hans said finally. Yeah, you should. But I'm tired of hating. I'm just tired. Someone produced a harmonica and started playing O Holy Night. Badly, but enthusiastically. Others joined with makeshift instruments, spoons against tin cups, hands clapping rhythm. Hans smiled, despite himself. This is crazy. Yeah, Kowalski agreed. But everything's crazy. Might as well be crazy together. Christmas morning arrived gray and cold. The spell of the previous night felt fragile in daylight. Hauptmann Weber conducted morning roll call as usual. The prisoner stood in formation, breath misting. The guards counted methodically. Everything returned to routine. But something had changed. Small things, barely noticeable, but real. The new commandant was younger, harder, a true believer who looked at the prisoners with contempt instead of weary recognition. Things are gonna get worse, Parker told his men. They did. Rations shrank. Beatings increased. The brief humanity of Christmas became a memory. But in Barracks 14, someone had saved a paper angel from the Christmas tree. It hung above Miller's bunk, growing more tattered each day. Why keep it? Kowalski asked. Because for one night, we weren't enemies. We were just men who missed home. Miller touched the angel gently. I need to remember that's possible. April 29th, 1945. The sound of artillery grew closer, day by day. The guards became agitated. Some deserted. Others stayed out of fear or loyalty, or simple inertia. That morning, American tanks rolled through the front gate. The 14th Armored Division. The guards surrendered without firing a shot. 76,000 prisoners, starved and exhausted, walked into freedom. Lieutenant Parker, now 50 pounds lighter than when captured, watched German guards being marched into the same barracks they'd controlled. He saw Becker in the line of surrendering guards. The former teacher looked old, defeated. Their eyes met briefly. Parker could have walked past, pretended not to recognize him, could have felt satisfaction at the reversal. Instead, he walked over, pulled out a cigarette, from an American pack this time, and offered it. Becker took it with shaking hands. You remember. Christmas Eve. You sang Silent Night from the tower. You sang it back. They smoked in silence. You'll go home, Parker said finally. Becker's eyes filled with tears. I don't know if there's a home anymore. Munich was bombed heavily. Then you'll find out, one way or another. Parker dropped his cigarette, ground it out. You asked me once if I had family. I told you about my daughter, 7 years old. I remember. She's 8 now. I'm going to meet her again, and I'm going to tell her about the German Guard who helped make Christmas happen in a POW camp. Not because you were good, not because the camp was humane, but because for one night you chose to be human instead of just a soldier. Will she understand? Probably not. Not for years, but someday. Robert Miller stood in his daughter's college dorm room, helping her move in. She was 18 now, off to study history at Berkeley. On her desk, carefully framed, was a tattered paper angel. Dad, why do you keep giving me this? It's falling apart. Because it's important. It's a piece of paper from a prison camp. It's proof, he said quietly, that even in the worst places, people can choose kindness. That night, over dinner, he told her again about the tree, the singing, the German Guard who shared cigarettes, the morning after when everyone went back to being soldiers. But something had changed anyway. Do you think little moments like that actually matter? In the grand scheme? They're all that matters. Wars are made of grand schemes. Peace is made of little moments when people choose humanity. Klaus Becker, retired schoolteacher, sat in his small apartment in rebuilt Munich. His daughter, the one who'd survived the war, visited with his granddaughter. Opa, tell the Christmas story, the child asked. He had told it many times. About the POW camp, the American prisoners, the singing, the brief truce. Was it real? His daughter asked. Or do you remember it better than it was? Both, probably. Memory is a kind lie we tell ourselves. He smiled. But the angel was real. The singing was real. The cigarettes the American lieutenant gave me when his men liberated the camp, those were real. Did you ever try to find him? I tried, but I didn't know his full name. Just Lieutenant Parker, American. There were thousands of Parkers. Would you want to see him again? Becker thought for a long moment. I don't know. We're old men now. The war is ancient history to your generation. A researcher at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum found a collection of letters donated by the family of Lieutenant James Parker, who had died in 1989. Among them was a journal from his time at Stalag VII-A. The December 24, 1944 entry was detailed, emotional, almost poetic. It described the Christmas tree, the singing, the conversation with Hauptmann Weber, the brief moment of shared humanity. The last line read, "Tonight, I learned that the war isn't between nations. It's between those who remember their humanity and those who forget it. Tomorrow, we'll all forget again, but tonight, we remembered." The museum included the journal in an exhibition about prisoner of war experiences. Thousands of visitors read Parker's words, some dismissing it as sentimentality, others deeply moved. One visitor, an elderly German woman visiting from Munich, stood in front of the display for 20 minutes, tears streaming down her face. A museum volunteer approached. "Are you all right?" "My father," she whispered. "My father was there. He told me this story. I thought perhaps he'd invented it, made it better than it was. But it was real. It was real." She pulled out her phone, called someone, spoke rapidly in German, then handed the phone to the volunteer. "My daughter wants to tell you something." The daughter's voice came through in accented English. "My grandmother is Klaus Becker's daughter. My great-grandfather was the guard in this story. We've kept his memory alive. We've told the Christmas story to every generation, and now we know it was real." Christmas Eve, 2024, 80 years after the truce at Stalag VII-A. In Moosburg, Bavaria, where the camp once stood, there's now a memorial. A simple stone marker. A plaque listing names of prisoners and guards. A small pine tree planted each December. People come to remember. Veterans' families, historians, students, tourists who stumbled upon the story and wanted to see the place. The barracks are gone. The wire is gone. The guard towers are gone. Only the memory remains. But memory is enough. Because on one frozen Christmas Eve in 1944, men who were supposed to kill each other sang instead. Guards who were supposed to be cruel shared food and cigarettes. Prisoners who were supposed to hate found compassion. It didn't end the war. It didn't save millions. It was just one night in one camp. A brief flicker of humanity in the darkness. But those brief flickers matter. They remind us that even in the worst circumstances, people can choose to be human. The story of Stalag VII-A's Christmas truce isn't about heroes. It's about ordinary men who, for one night, refused to let war make them into something less than human. And in a world that still builds walls and draws lines and calls people enemies, that's a story worth remembering.